Welcome to this episode of Abide in Me, How Jesus Models Secure Attachment with God. This series is a survey of the Gospel of Mark, looking for how Jesus models what is now called secure attachment, which is the physiological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual experience of what is often called salvation or regeneration or being conjoined with God or enlightenment, individuation, even becoming spiritual. Through the series, we will discover the benefits of becoming securely attached with God, which is the transformation of one's life into one of joy and satisfaction. There are moments in our lives when we just get it. We have a visceral, physiological reaction to some realization. A thought comes to us like a light bulb switching on, and an emotion follows, often gladness, and a smile appears spontaneously on our face. Many wise teachers suggest that this experience can become normal for us. Swedenborg calls it perception. Buddha, Gurdjieff, Jung describe similar states. It is a mental and spiritual condition marked by clarity and ease, one that even relaxes the body. Perhaps an early example of it applied to our lives is inner tennis, when the encouragement was to get into the zone. Our study of the Gospel of Mark arises from the conviction that a human being is designed by God to have this perception based on a connection with God, a relationship of mutual love, a relationship that produces a consistent, although not likely constant, state of perception. The journey into this way of being is lifelong. This ability to perceive emerges first in adulthood and requires ongoing effort and development. Along the way, we are called to keep listening and to keep learning from the lessons that life offers us that come to us because we have this perception. To get there takes some effort. It's noticed that we really need to hear something a number of times before it contributes to a new state of perception. Sometimes 7 times, right? Sometimes it takes a third person saying what we've already said. We've all experienced that moment when a loved one finally hears something we've been saying for years, only because someone else said it. This is the 3rd time that Jesus tells the people around him that he's going to die. And that's so shocking that they don't hear the final phrase in his predictions that he is going to rise from the dead. And so for the 3rd time, the apostles deflect. They do not hear that last line. So what will it take for me to hear that God is love? That I am loved, that I am loving, that I can live securely in a trust that all will be well. What does it take for me to get there? Our premise is that Jesus is reaching for connection. He's not trying to stir up fear. But the disciples are ordinary people, right? Undergoing unprecedented spiritual awakening. And Jesus meets them at the level of that new awareness that he is instilling in them. So let us also react differently and listen beyond the bad, frightening prediction of an ordeal, and instead look for encouragement to perceive the joy and satisfaction in the present moment. This scripture, like so many others, is describing our own personal spiritual growth as we intentionally, consciously travel through life, and along the way, through lesson after lesson, we are transformed into spiritual beings rather than merely materialistic. So, the presumption is Jesus is reaching for a connection here. The people are already afraid. He does not need to rely on scare tactics to get them to listen. That's something insecure people do to be heard and seen, not securely attached people. So in the story, word has spread amongst the people that they are headed toward Jerusalem and a confrontation. Whether consciously or not, they sense an impending doom. And now, for the third time, Jesus tells them he will be killed and will rise again. For me, my experience, the moment of fear comes when, for instance, I become convinced that I'm right and that it is my duty to make others see it, and if they don't, something bad is going to happen. That conviction can justify me cutting someone else off and dismissing their beliefs, and not listening to their pain or their complaints. The joy of being right can harden my heart to another's joy or their pain. And instead, I'll hear only a challenge to my ego if there's any pushback. The pleasure, the neurological reward of that self-affirmation can dull my sensitivity to someone else's pain. The fear of the death of this joy will appear again and again and again in my life. So it is vital that I hear Jesus say that this death leads to life. What is dying? It catches me when I actually hear him say that there's going to be a resurrection. And fully realizing this is what allows me to turn away from the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations that feel like a threat, that actually would derail my journey if I went with them. So by practicing observing this fear of the death of my ego and so creating emotional distance, I become open to what is called perception, being in the zone, in the flow of light and warmth that's coming from within. When we are in a state of perception, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations arise from the world that would destroy that perception if we embrace them. In that moment of ordeal, we feel a fundamentally different kind of fear, a fear that signals a critical moment on our spiritual path. We can cultivate a sensitivity to this fear that urges us to avoid the loss of perception. Jesus reveals this moment to us so that we can recognize it and not allow it to halt our journey. This moment's a positive opportunity to avert or turn away from what would take away perception, from what would grab our attention towards worldly, selfish defense tactics that we've all learned that protect our ego. Jesus is modeling distinguishing the fear of the loss of ego from the fear of the loss of perception. Jesus felt this aversion, this positive fear of losing perception. So he addressed it straightforward, right on, talking about it. I feel a deep connection with Jesus precisely because he also felt fear and had to sit with it repeatedly. I am in awe of his sense of trust and security that he could just talk openly about it. His foreknowledge of what awaited him, something my finite mind can't do, and so I'm spared this, but that did not eliminate his aversion. The certainty of suffering still produced fear, but Jesus does not accept suffering blindly or passively. This suffering is not random victimhood. It is the suffering that comes from living one's mission according to your higher power, right? Your inner voice of conscience. And then experiencing opposition for taking that principled stand that challenges an egotistical, materialistic definition of righteousness. So like Jesus, we must intentionally choose to go to Jerusalem. Only then can we experience perception, that ease of heart, the clarity of mind, the confidence in our way. We will continue toward the death of ego. We will feel fear, resisting whatever would destroy this new state of awareness is an ongoing work. So Jesus models secure attachment with God. When I see him taking the next step and the next toward Jerusalem and the completion of his divine plan, his success for our salvation, my heart is strengthened. He's modeling what a person who has a secure connection with his Father and with me will do. I continue on my journey because I want that connection too. Well, in the story, this perceptive mood is immediately lost when we read that James and John ask to be given seats of power in Jesus' new kingdom. That is their way of deflecting from the agony, the pressure of their fear. How Jesus responds, and again models for us his self-assurance and his secure attachment with his followers and with the divine within his soul, is amazing and such a wonderful moment for us to learn. These men have been with Jesus for nearly 3 years. They were just told for a third time that he was going to die as part of his mission to establish the kingdom. And yet they continue to think that it is a material, civil government. They continue to think that their glory will be achieved by having political or earthly power. Well, my first thought is to criticize the disciples for being so immature, for missing the point, right? What have you been doing for 3 years? Why don't you get it yet? Jesus' response to his followers instead affirms their deeper primary motion from which these men were operating. James and John fear the imminent loss of their beloved rabbi. They are deeply convinced that he is the promised Messiah, the anointed one, the new king. The brothers simply share their agony with their trusted leader. They impulsively reach out to Jesus for comfort, that they would not be abandoned, which is one of the deepest fears humans can experience. So that's what Jesus saw them doing. The 10 others overhear this plea for intercession, and they don't go along with it, right? They react angrily. Obviously, there are only 2 closest positions to the Messiah, on the left and the right. In their upset, I'm sure their amygdalas were firing up and interfering with their ability to think. They assume James and John are reaching for power over them so they can be in charge. Or perhaps the 10 think that the brothers believe they are better than the rest and deserve the honor. So they verbally object. James, John, and the rest do not yet feel safe in the face of what they see to be the impending doom that's going to come down upon them and the loss of their beloved Messiah when they would be left adrift without a leader. Their reaction makes sense given their insecure attachment. Jesus corrects their notions while at the same time reducing their rights. He does not confront them. He doesn't point out their immaturity. Jesus acknowledges their underlying human need for connection that the men are fearful of losing. And we note that he includes all of them in that corrected view. He doesn't single out James and John for some extra rebuke. All of us have a more or less conscious desire for inclusion, security, love, and joy. We need repeated assurance that someone, right, capital S, is taking care that we have a chance for having those needs met. We can tolerate not knowing how our needs will be met if we experience our loved one caring about us and caring about our needs. Humans are created with a need for connection. We must achieve it on our own or it won't be truly ours. So there's a part of us, a lower part of our being, that feels a heavy responsibility for arranging that care, for arranging an intercession to take care of us. And there's also a part of us, a deeper part of our being, that wants to assure our loved one that all will be well and that we will intervene to protect our loved one and to give assurance that all will be well. So Jesus reminds us that fulfilling these deep attachment needs for connection is met not by ourselves nor by external forces, nor by someone else interceding. They are met by my going on a journey with my power, my God, the source, which journey lasts my whole life. I can expect that there will be difficult times, like when someone we care about gets angry at us. What do we do then? Or when we fail to adequately care for another, by mistake or on purpose. And that feeling of guilt. Knowing that our God is walking with us, staying with us through it all, forgiving us all along the way, keeps us putting one foot in front of the other for one more day. It's the love that heals and energizes us. And here Jesus reminds us that there will be death at the end of every segment of our journey. Our ego will die, or a deeply held selfish or worldly desire will die, or a long-sought dream of honor and power will die. We suffer the fear of that death. We go through that suffering. But we will keep moving when we avert from all of those materialistic, earthly solutions that would take us off the path. We keep moving because we have the thought that we are loved, that there is hope and healing on the path, on the journey we are on. We keep on because we experience the presence of unconditional love that has no condemnation or criticism, even while the experience transforms our understanding of the very nature of life, that it's not about power or role or position. It's about caring and connection and abundance and relationship. Our daily task then is to stop and notice our wish for intercession, that someone else would take care of us and fix it, right? And let that go in favor of an assurance that we will continue to love and be loved, and so safe and securely connected. With practice, we can ever more quickly and ever more easily go through the ordeal and experience the resurrection that will always come. Now, chapter 10 ends with a miraculous healing of a blind man. I note that this is the last miracle of healing that Jesus does in the Gospel of Mark. So perhaps there's an important message there, right? The particulars of this story are another example of Jesus modeling how we can come to recognize blindness in ourselves and others, and then how to react from a heart of compassion and offer healing love. 2,000 years ago, blindness suggested a lack of righteousness. The shunned person was left dependent on others, likely reduced to begging. Judgmental people would see such people as nuisances at best. And so that is why, in the story, as a beloved rabbi and now famous healer was walking along with the people he was teaching, those people would be pushing to get closer and shuffling around, trying to hear what Jesus was saying. And so they would easily be bothered by a beggar being in the way, making noise, as this man was, because he'd caught on that Jesus was passing by, and he began to yell, crying out for help. I want to notice when I'm complaining about something. I want to know if my initial reaction to interference that's happening to me is the product of my being judgmental, egotistical, merely natural. Because the human brain is wired from creation to react to barriers to information that may be critical to my survival. The impulse to end the interference is key to our survival as a species. However, control of such impulses is a fundamental feature of someone who's being a human being, who is spiritually awake. Jesus is here modeling how I can advance my spiritual development by learning how to respond to being annoyed from a place of spiritual awareness and acceptance. because upon hearing the man's cries over the din of the crowd, Jesus stops what he's doing so that he might recognize the man's plight. We could imagine that if Jesus discovered that if the yelling was coming from some privileged religious leader accusing him, Jesus' reaction would have been different. He would have reacted from love, but maintaining his mission, as we've seen in the past. But it seems to me that Jesus has now developed a trained ear, a sensitive to the cries of someone in emotional pain. That's what he hears. Jesus' first reaction is to listen for the voice of the inner wound that is crying out for healing. Now, that's probably an advanced stage of humanness, but we can all aspire to it. When we read the story today, we know that blindness is a metaphor for ignorance. Let me be clear here. This isn't evilness or stupidity. It's when we don't know something, we are blind. As Helen Keller wrote, there are worse things than being blind. She wrote, it is a terrible thing to see and have no vision. Right? Certainly, ignorance can hold me back in my material and in my spiritual development. Yet the deeper task is to develop a vision of goodness in myself and in others. I am to seek the God of love, that is the source of all wisdom and love, by acknowledging that there is a flow of God's divine love into and through me, into and through everyone else, and it's manifested in all humans doing good. What stops us in this journey from ignorance to wisdom is fearful judgment rather than compassion. It is to be critical of ignorance, thinking that it is something that I would use to disparage someone else. Why do we hide our ignorance or deflect from our own ignorance by pointing it out in others? It's pretty common. Why are we so afraid of ignorance that we get angry when confronted by others' ignorance or our own ignorance? Why do we get mad at ourselves? Why do we get so defensive? It's because we are not on the way. We are not perceptive. We are not listening instead for the pain of the wound that is underneath that. Jesus models two ways of being that illustrate this reach for connection with ignorance from a healthy sense of self-worth and power. First, he had become sensitive to the spiritual and emotional pain of others, often hidden within complaint and anger. He became sensitive to the emotional pain of others, which is underneath the noise of their complaining. And underneath it all, we now know, and he learned, is fear. The fear of loss, of connection, of being abandoned, and so forth. And then secondly, after he was sensitive to that, he gave the person what he already had, which was a sight of the healing love and truth that a person's faith would lead them to the good life. When I experienced that, when I experienced living this good life based on my faith, my trust in my God, then when others see that, their ignorance is not an issue anymore. It's not a denigration. It's not a handicap. It's healed. For me to develop that sensitivity to others' pains, I have to let go of the need to judge them. And this is scary, right? How do I protect myself if I'm not constantly assessing what's going on in my environment? Well, Jesus and modern brain studies tell us that we have to risk being human. We have to try reaching for connection rather than judging. God's design is for our success and our eternal well-being. That's the default. And to achieve that, we have to reach for connection on our own, experiencing it as our own. We own it, and we are freely choosing to do that. We can't establish a relationship with someone else by proxy. right? No one else can establish a relationship for me. No one else can intercede and create a relationship. I have to take the risk. So I have to risk my very real but transient, emotional, perhaps even physical safety for the goal of a spiritual, eternal healing connection, which I value more, which I may be ignorant of, but know that ignorance is not evil and bad, and it's not going to stop me from seeking that connection. Modern brain research has confirmed what Jesus is actually teaching, that the brain, activated by desire for loving connection, very well manages fear and disappointment. Past negative experiences and the biological impulse for safety do not stop a person who is secure in their sense of self and worth and see the value of a spiritual connection. A person who's experienced giving and receiving love, who can be trusted and trusts. Such a living faith that accepts the mystery of life, the flow of divine love from within. That faith will be a foundation for the letting go of selfishness and judgmentalism and materialism. We all can have such a faith that, as Jesus says repeatedly, will heal us and save us, allowing us to proceed on the way, on the journey of life. So our practice is to listen for the pain underneath complaints, my complaints and others' complaints. And so respond with love and compassion that accepts the person as they are and accept ourselves as we are. And God's love will then flow through our souls, and we will be bringers of peace and joy, right? Modeling the peace and assurance of a secure attachment with our God, and so with other people. I pray this has supported your transformative life, whatever practice you have in your life. I want to thank Solomon Keel for his music, and I want to invite you to make a contribution to this work if you wish and are able through the PayPal link. And I invite you to continue to listen to the next episode. You be well.